Hi, good afternoon everyone. My name's Tom and I'm a developer advocate based in Sydney, Australia. So I've traveled over here to talk to you a little bit about augmented reality and virtual reality and some of the updates that we announced at Google I/O earlier this year in those areas. So to start with, I'll start talking about virtual reality at Google and the Daydream platform that we've been working on. You might be thinking, well, why is Google working on virtual reality? Well, one way I think of it is that obviously Google's mission statement, if you remember it, is to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful. And so in some ways, virtual reality in general is just a new medium, I guess, that we're cataloging and working with. If you think of Google's history, we started with really organizing and indexing text, then images, and then video through YouTube, which is obviously the largest video platform on the web. And so virtual reality is really just a new medium, in a sense, of content to make accessible and useful. And one way of making that sort of universally accessible is to make it very simple for people to use and get access to through things like the Daydream Viewer, which is a headset that allows a mobile phone that's compatible with Daydream virtual reality to be placed inside this headset and then immediately used by the user. Our first step into virtual reality, you might be familiar with it, was called Google Cardboard. And that's still around, but Daydream builds on top of Cardboard by improving it in a few areas, such as the comfort, the control, and the compatibility. From the comfort perspective, it has a head strap so that it frees up your ability to use your hands while wearing the headset and doesn't cause any sort of fatigue with your arms while holding the headset, like with Cardboard. The control is enabled through the dedicated Daydream controller, which is effectively a remote that changes the experience from being passive to interactive. And then finally, compatibility is addressed through this sort of adjustable space that allows different size phones, different widths and thicknesses to fit into the headset. And speaking of a variety of smart devices that can fit inside the Daydream Viewer, I'm happy to say that there's now 8 Daydream-ready phones on the market. And on top of that, the Samsung S8 is supporting Daydream as well through an update. On top of that, there are other manufacturers looking at building Daydream phones in the near future. LG and Motorola are working on Daydream phones. So this means that there's going to be tens of millions of devices in the market soon. But another thing we announced at Google I/O is that we're broadening sort of the Daydream platform to include these new standalone VR headsets with WorldSense. So we wanted to look into ways we could improve the VR experience even further beyond mobile phones. And so with the standalone VR, this enables us to kind of focus more on exactly what is necessary to enable a really great VR experience beyond just the standard components that are in a mobile phone. And so that enabled us to add this technology we called WorldSense, which effectively allows the Daydream virtual reality to have 6 degrees of freedom. The best way to demonstrate this is with this video. So basically with an existing Daydream Viewer and an existing Daydream phone, it can only track the rotation of the headset. But with the WorldSense in a dedicated Daydream device, you can also track the movement. So that means sort of like the displacement of the X and Y and Z as the user moves around the environment, which means that you can do more interactive experiences like ducking and weaving and moving around, dodging objects. And we believe that these dedicated VR devices will be really great for enabling or improving the sharing of virtual reality in a household. As you can imagine, if you have a device that's already set up and it's already potentially charged, then people are just going to be able to immediately walk up to it and put it on rather than having to take their phone and put it into the viewer. and Lenovo and HTC are building devices for this standalone headset. And of course, the new headsets also support the Daydream controller, which I mentioned earlier. It's really a pretty simple device, but it's actually quite expressive in terms of what it can do. So it has a gyroscope, and it does simulated 6 degrees of freedom tracking, so that it can actually also track the movement up and down, left and right, forward and back. And yeah, I mean, remarkably, it actually has more inputs than a regular computer mouse. So it's got this clickable touchpad at the top, and it's got a dedicated app button that developers can use. And then the home button is reserved for the Daydream system to manage, allowing the user to go back to the home screen. Additionally, we've actually now got over 150 apps and games available on the platform. Actually, that number's back from Google I/O, so it's probably even higher now. And that's actually pretty great, because that's actually triple since the start of this year. That really indicates the growth of the platform. And this is the current Daydream home screen, if you haven't seen it before. I'm going to show you what the new 2.0 home screen looks like in a little bit, but I just want to give you this image, because I'm about to tell you some facts about the top row of images. You can see there the Fantastic Beasts and where to find them, Wonder Glade, and Home Run Derby. I wanted to draw your attention to those because you can see that these 3 windows are what we call discovery windows in Daydream and the Daydream home screen. And what they enable is us to be able to deep link into a piece of content on the platform, and that can send the user directly into that app and that Daydream VR experience to a particular new feature, or if the user doesn't have it installed, can deep link them through the Play Store VR to install the app and then experience that particular piece of content. So with that in mind, one interesting thing that we've discovered since we launched the platform is that 40% of all sessions begin with at least one click on a discovery window. And additionally, 35% of all the Daydream sessions include a visit to the VR Play Store. So what this tells us is that users are really exploring, and they're interested in discovering and trying new VR content, which is obviously really great news. Additionally, we've found that there are 3 times as many buyers per active user when compared to the equivalent metric for 2D apps, and that 32% more money is being spent per active user when compared to 2D apps, which is also really great news, because we all know that VR content can be expensive to make, and so it's really great to know that users are actually spending more and appreciating the value of VR as well. Also, the average Daydream user spends 40 minutes per week in Daydream content. So, and also, 50% of that time is actually in video VR experiences, which is a very interesting insight to take into account. Because now we actually see that video is sort of like a core use case of VR. So if you're building an app or a game, we really recommend you try and think about how you can incorporate VR to be part of that experience. Another fact that's worth taking into account and thinking about is that we've seen that there's a correlation between the length of the content experience and the rating it acquires on the store. So we really recommend trying to build longer experiences in virtual reality that match the user's expectations of what they're going to be downloading and experiencing. A lot of these facts obviously make a lot of sense in hindsight, but it's good to see the data really backing it up. And now this is actually the 2.0 home screen for Daydream that I mentioned I was going to show to you. So there's a few different changes. You probably can't remember exactly what's different. The biggest difference really, I mean, some of it's just a cleanup and a refinement, but the biggest difference is to actually the discovery windows. They're still there, but what we've added is this ability to categorize different discovery windows. You can see the categories at the top, and actually be able to have more in the carousel at one all together for the user to browse through. So you can see that behind the Game of Thrones discovery window, you can see more discovery windows hidden behind that the user can scroll through with the touchpad. Also, This is the notification center that you're probably all very familiar with on Android, now actually displayed inside the VR experience. The user can bring this down whenever they need to and dismiss or manage some of their notifications while they're still in VR, rather than having to take the headset off and be taken out of the VR experience to do these things. So you can even also use Chromecast to project the experience that you're having in VR while you're still in VR to a Chromecast device like an Android TV or a Chromecast dongle plugged into a TV. So you can Chromecast and send your visuals to a TV so that if you've got other people in the household or whatever environment you're in, they can actually watch what you're experiencing, and they won't see it as split up across the two different cameras of the VR experience you're having. They'll see it as like a merged experience. Additionally, you can even actually capture VR screenshots and VR videos while you're in the VR experience as well, which is obviously going to be really great for the virality of the platform. Obviously, that enables people to be able to share online and really show off whatever your app or your game is capable of. And lastly, obviously in-app purchases have been built into the Daydream UI since the very beginning to reduce the friction of purchases. But in addition to that, we're adding support for Android permissions to be accepted inside of the virtual reality experience as well. Previously, users actually had to remove the headset and go back into the phone mode to accept one of the what we call dangerous Android permissions, such as access to the SD card or storage. And so now that we've got that inside the VR experience, this means that there'll be even less friction for introducing those permissions into your app. And lastly, just a quick note, obviously, Daydream's SDK is available for native Android development, Unreal Engine, and Unity as well. So that's Daydream in a nutshell. There are more phones, new phones coming. There's the new standalone VR headsets coming, which I think are going to be really cool, especially the ability to have that world sense technology. And then there are a bunch of enhancements we're making to the platform to make it even more seamless and reduce friction. So now I'm going to change gears and talk a little bit about our augmented reality platform, which you might have heard of. It's called Tango. And Tango is probably best summarized as a combination of hardware and software that lets devices understand space and motion in the real world. So when I say that, I mean there's extra sensors put on the devices, and there's some computer vision software running as part of the Tango SDK that enables this. And ultimately, it actually allows these devices to almost see the world more like how a human being interprets or sees the world. So the hardware sensors and technology on the device. This device, by the way, is the Lenovo Fab 2 Pro, which launched late last year. The key technologies are a depth sensing laser at the top, a wider angle lens for motion tracking, and then finally some extra hardware for vision processing. And this is another really cool phone that just launched recently called the Asus Zenfone AR. And actually, interestingly, this is the first Tango and Daydream capable phone on the market. So it's really incredible, firstly, to see all of the Tango sensors packed into a smartphone-sized device. So the Lenovo Fab 2 Pro, which I just showed you, is more of a smaller tablet, but this is actually legitimately a smartphone-sized device that you can see people using more regularly in the real world. And it's really cool that it's actually capable of both Tango and Daydream, because that means that you could do things like, say, capture an environment using the Tango sensors and then immediately view that environment using the Daydream VR experience. And so because this perception of space and movement are so fundamental to the way that we live and we experience the world, we really think it will be inevitable that all phones will eventually have these types of sensors, and that it's really just a matter of time for that to happen. Now to tell you a little bit about the software behind Tango that enables it to work, there's really three key elements, and these are the core elements that are already available on the platform. There's motion tracking algorithms that allow the device to track objects in the real world, but also it enables the device itself to understand its own position in the real world. And actually the WorldSense technology from Daydream is based on this motion tracking algorithms from Tango. There's also area alerting, which is what allows the device to remember a particular location, and then when you come back to that location, it can react to seeing cues in that environment. So you could walk up to a museum exhibit and have identified or marked that particular object in the museum as important, and you could design your app to react to it and augment that museum exhibit to have additional information appear for the user. And then finally, there's the depth perception software that allows the device to use the dedicated depth sensor to measure the distance directly in front of the hardware and understand the planes of, understand actually like the physical planes in front of it, both horizontal and vertical. Here are a couple of examples of ways developers are experimenting with Tango. So The Sims Free Play, which is built by the Fire Monkeys studio from Electronic Arts based in Melbourne, have been working on enabling Tango to be able to use the motion tracking to have the user be able to move through their world that they've, like their own physical world, move through the physical world, but then see through the device the virtual world of their Sims that they've created. So they can literally walk through the household that they've created in the Sims and experience it. And on the app side, Pottery Barn have been testing out Tango to allow users to simulate placing products from Pottery Barn's catalog into the physical world and see what the products would look like inside their household or their apartment with accurate measurements for the dimensions. So you can place this couch down and it'll actually be accurate up to like a centimeter level so that the user knows, oh yeah, that couch is going to fit in my living room, and that's what it's going to look like with the rest of my furniture. Another area, now for the areas where we're enhancing the Tango platform, an area where we're enhancing is the real-time drift correction. So we already had drift correction, obviously, in the platform. So the easiest way to understand, I guess, what drift correction actually means is to firstly show it to you. And basically what this is it's how quickly the device can recover and recognize where it is in the world after it's been, say, thrown off target. So in this case, the phone is placed up against this, I don't know how to describe this, it's placed up against this frame in front of it, and the user has marked a few points in space to create this orange box. Then the user has pointed the phone away from that space, shaken it pretty violently, and then drawn the phone back up in front of that space. And you can see within a split second, it realizes that that's the same space it was just looking at prior, and is able to correct that drift that has occurred, even though it's a very violent kind of drifting. Additionally, we're working on some more samples for environmental occlusion and illumination to demonstrate how you can use information from the RGB camera and the depth camera to perform some pretty cool effects, which I'll just show you now. So this is environmental occlusion. You can see how the planes, which are virtually placed in the world, are both flying in front of, but also flying behind and being cut by the outline of the body of the man standing in the scene. So this is being achieved by taking the depth sensor information and using that as like a mask to cull the information of the elements which are being visually placed, like the 3D objects such as the planes. And we've written more illumination samples to demonstrate how you can take a physical element in the screen, such as this piece of red paper, and use the color of it to be reflected onto virtual objects in your environment. So you can see how the billiards ball, the green ball, changes color, and some of the red light is diffused onto the object from the red paper. Additionally, we're testing integration between Chromium, i.e. Google Chrome, and Tango's APIs to create web AR, or web augmented reality. So this will allow web developers to be able to access Tango's APIs. You can see here an example that Wayfair has prototyped, which uses the web AR integration to allow Chrome to measure an environment in front of it, and then use the dimensions that the user measures to perform a search filter, or search query with a filter, returning only the products in Wayfair's product catalog that physically fit within those dimensions. So obviously that's a really cool application of how you can use augmented reality, but also leverage the discoverability of the web that we all love. But one of the coolest new features coming to Tango is VPS, or Visual Positioning Service. So you can think of this a bit like GPS, which is obviously a technology we all know and love, known as Global Positioning Service. But Visual Positioning Service is a little bit different because it's designed to allow developers to map indoor environments and then create better location-based AR experiences through it. It's kind of like an enhanced evolution of the area learning technology I mentioned earlier. So you can think of VPS as a coordinate system to overlay digital content onto the real world, and it can provide navigation to indoor environments like museums or warehouses, and place digital content over your view when you arrive. And over time, the VPS builds a cloud map, a scalable system for handling living rooms or warehouses. And that means that every capture and recapture of the environment is incorporated into the map, and it improves over time. And yeah, just to re-emphasize this is really purely visual tracking. No Wi-Fi or Bluetooth beacons are required. It's just 100% visual. Here's just a quick example of an app built in collaboration between Google, Lenovo, the WWF, and a Singapore artist. The app is called Into the Wild, and it sort of demonstrates what you could really do with this technology. So you can walk up to a particular environment. Actually, they've applied it and used it at the Art Science Museum of Singapore, and it allows users to walk up to particular environments and have a digital piece of content appear in front of them that's really tailored to that particular physical place. So, you know, if you've got a room that's of a certain set of dimensions, you could use this to have a tailored experience for that particular room, or corridors, or any kind of part of your environment. If you're interested in the VPS, take a photo of this slide and sign up for updates on when it will become available. We're still working on it, but my recommendation to you is, if you're interested in it, right now you should start exploring the Tango SDK and get used to the existing core technologies like motion tracking, depth sensing, which are obviously the traditional foundations for great AR experiences, and then start brainstorming of what you would do and what you would build with a persistent AR layer on the real world through VPS. So again, that's Tango in a nutshell. There's real-time drift correction so that the performance is even better and even more seamless. There are more samples that we're working on to demonstrate more advanced techniques. There's Web AR, which I think is a really cool addition. And lastly, and probably most importantly, the visual positioning service is going to be really expanding what you can do with augmented reality with Tango. So that's everything from me. Thanks very much. I'll be in the Ask the Speaker section after this talk, so you're welcome to just come up and ask me any questions you have on AR and VR. So thank you.